But do we know if it's going? It's supposed to do something, right?
It should have, it's recording.
Huh?
It's recording.
Okay. So hi, it's kind of cool to see so many people here in the room. I'm honored. Okay, so today we're going to talk about exercise, and we're all aware that exercise is obviously a super integral part of our wellness program, and obviously you're all doing something for exercise, and you're all to be commended for that. So the point of this lecture today is just to acknowledge that yes, it's a huge part of it, and one of the ways that we operate is to just kind of assume that you know what you're doing and you're going to keep doing it. And we're to be honest, that part's not going to change. You really are kind of on your own to have an exercise program and figure out the things that work for you and what it is you're going to do to take care of that component of your wellness. But it's certainly, I'm not doing my job very well if I don't establish sort of what some underlying principles are for how you should be exercising, because obviously that's might help you decide what are the things that you're going to do so that you can stay a fit and functional person. And just like everybody in the room, I'm getting as old as the rest of us. And so I'm certainly valuing this concept of what I call function a lot, because that's what matters, is maintaining your function. And you want to maintain your function so you can be a fit person, and you're going to maintain your function better if you keep your fitness up, and vice versa. You're going to maintain your fitness better if you're functional, if you can move and get up and down in your chair and hold yourself up. Those are all parts of function. So that's kind of what this talk about today is, and certainly we'll entertain lots of questions. So it's just a cartoon. I do weights for muscle health, cardio for heart health, and chocolate for mental health. That's not an unimportant part of fitness for sure. Huh? Good brain food, exactly. Okay, so this program is about wellness and modeling what we call healthy behaviors. And part of the thing I've learned, especially I've been here a long time, and I'm seeing a lot of us getting older, and as I am myself. And so we have this expectation that as we get older, we're supposed to decline. So we just sort of decline because we think we're supposed to. And I'm sort of reinforcing the notion that that's necessarily not true. If you can delay that decline, if you basically keep using stuff. So that's again what this program is kind of all about, is behaviors that help you maintain your activity and healthy behaviors. And the more you practice good, healthy behaviors, taking care of yourself, basically, hopefully, the more you're going to forestall this decline in aging that we're all actually ultimately going to see. But we want it to happen when we're 110, not when we're 70. So there's a huge, very well-established connection between health and activity. People that are more active are the ones that stay healthier. And there's tons of studies out there. Framingham is a big one that's long-term. Harvard alumni, this guy Paffenberger has a lot of papers out there about the role of activity in maintaining health. And Morris is the guy who did the London Busman. I don't know if you've heard of that project before or not, but that was hails from like the 50s, the 60s, where they actually looked at bus drivers versus the conductors, the ones that moved up and down around the trains. And those are the guys that were healthier than the people that just sat and drove the buses. And Dr. Lopez was just here a little while ago, and he was alluding to the blue zones and the places in the world where the people live the longest. And one of the factors that helps those people with their longevity is the fact that they're active. They do stuff. They do stuff just by the way they live, because they are active individuals. They walk places and they do things as groups that are basically physically active. And here's a group of singers and dancers from Okinawa. Pretty cute little group of women there. Let's see. So just some general facts that the greatest potential for reducing mortality is becoming more fit, more active. And experts agree that most physical decline that people suffer is not from age, but just simply from not using stuff. Use it or lose it. Super, super true. So that Harvard alumni study that was mentioned just above, those burning 2,000 calories a week suffered only half the annual mortality of people that were not as active. And kind of a well-established decline is this loss of your muscle mass. And so inactive people means you're not using stuff. You're going to lose your muscle fiber at a rate of about 3 to 5% every decade. So that means if you do nothing for 30 years, you're going to lose basically, you know, about 15% of your functional ability to lift stuff, because those muscles waste away if you're not using them. So in terms of kind of what you're supposed to be doing, the Surgeon General, the CDC, is obviously a national governing body that establishes some guidelines for kind of what they wish the country was doing. And the recommendations a long time ago were quite simple. And it just said that the encouragement was to do about 30 minutes most days of the week. And it didn't matter if you did it all at one time or you did it in one big chunk, but basically that was encouragement, 30 minutes most days of the week. And then, I don't know, at least 10 years ago, they got more sophisticated and the guidelines got way more convoluted and wordy, and it boils down to kind of the same thing. So they have recommendations both for aerobic stuff, meaning walking, and they encourage 2 hours and 30 minutes, 150 minutes of moderate intensity activity during the week, and strength training stuff 2 days a week that works all the major muscle groups: legs, hips, back, abdomen, chest, shoulders, and arms. And if that's too much time, then if the encouragement as well, you could work out less, only 75 minutes if you were more vigorous, if you were running as opposed to walking. Or you could have some mix of moderate versus vigorous activity if that was your approach to it. So like I said, a lot of convolutions, and but the upshot of it is it still boils down to 30 minutes, about 5 days a week. That would be 150 minutes with the addition of these 2 days a week of strength training stuff that they're recommending. Okay. And in terms of, I don't know if you ever looked at the CDC webpage, but it's pretty mind-blowing. And there are tons of people out there who must spend their entire lives just collecting data and putting it together in these charts and stuff. And so they have lots of these maps of different things. And here's a map from 2015 of the prevalence of participation in those kinds of guidelines that they were suggesting. So in California in 2015, about a quarter of the population, 22 to 26% of the population, basically did what they were suggesting: 150 minutes, 2 days a week of exercise. They don't have any maps after 2015, but they did have some other stats, which is what these are. So those guidelines boiled down to basically 150 minutes a week and 2 days a week of strength training. And these numbers over here from 2011, 2013 to 2019, the good thing is that actually at least half of the population is claiming to get enough cardiovascular activity. So 50+% of the people for the last decade are saying that they're getting at least 30 minutes of exercise 5 days a week. So that's good. In terms of the strength training, that's only about a third of the population. And the number of people that meet both these goals, meaning they get 150 minutes plus they do some strength training, is down in the 20s. So that's not a big chunk of the population. That means that 80% of the population is not meeting these guidelines. Sad, but true. And you guys obviously are in the 20% that are doing it, we assume. Okay, so that's just the prevalence. And so I think you're aware that I hail from UC Davis, and I worked for many years with Dr. Capagoda in this thing called the Reversal Program. And that was a program that was super goal oriented. And we had very specific goals for how people should eat and how they should meditate and also how they should exercise. So these were the exercise goals for that program: 45 minutes basically of cardiovascular exercise 5 days a week, 2 or 3 days of strength training, and some flexibility stuff. And here's a picture I put up here because I think Kevin knows Trish, right? Mm-hmm. This is Trish in this picture. And Dr. Buka Putnam was here last week, and she was talking about Sharon. That Sharon Myers on the right, another nurse that used to work there at UC Davis with us. So great personnel. And Trish is the only person actually that's still at UC Davis in their cardiac rehab program. And then, so that's the Versa program goals. There are kind of some goals for this program. And again, it's all super individualized, but they're really pretty much the same, that you get a significant number of minutes. And so we've kind of stretched it a little bit to the 30 side, because maybe when you're 90, it's not so important that you get 60 minutes of hardcore cardiovascular exercise a day. So 30 to 60 minutes is what we're hoping you're at least getting. Again, most days of the week. We're only here 3 days a week, so hopefully you're getting some walking or something in somewhere else besides what you're doing here. Or maybe you're doing a lot of time here, so you don't have to do any time elsewhere. That's an okay approach. I still encourage that you're doing some strength training somewhere, and we're going to talk a lot more about that. And I personally also think flexibility is super important. And again, the older I'm getting, the more stuff I'm doing that's along those same notions of strength and a flexibility exercise that also helps impart some balance to you, because that's an important part of your fitness regime, or it should be. And so here's our room. If you notice, there's somebody on every piece of machinery there. Okay, so just some general definitions that kind of help you understand this notion of doing stuff. So activity is just movement. Okay, so any movement that you're doing where you're changing planes, changing your dimensions in space across a distance is activity. Okay, so it could be physical exercise, or it could be just doing stuff. It could be working around your house, or working around your yard, or going out and doing things in the community, etc. So there's lots of things we do throughout our day that aren't specifically an exercise session, but they certainly count as exercise because it's activity and we're using muscles and we're doing things. When you're exercising, you're basically doing a specific activity with a specific goal in mind, that you're trying to use a certain muscle or a certain organ in a certain way. Okay, and we'll talk more about that. So like I said, exercise that's got a specific purpose in mind. And so the kinds of things that we do, again, have ramifications and things you're trying to accomplish. So when you're reaching and bending and you're taking joints through their range of motion, like you're stretching, whether it's dynamic or static, that's going to help you become more flexible. And muscles are the things that have to exert tension and lift things against gravity. And so when you're doing that, and there's resistance involved, when a muscle is working against resistance, that's what helps it maintain its strength, its mass. Okay, so lifting weights is a resistance exercise, and resistance exercises using muscles lifting stuff against gravity helps maintain those muscles. Okay, and then the cardiovascular things we do are the rhythmic sustained activities where you're using lots of muscles in your body. You're breathing harder, your heart rate's going up, pumping more blood around to your working muscles, your metabolism's going up. Those are the things that are considered cardiovascular activities and are helping you from a heart health perspective. Okay, so we'll talk more about this MET concept in a little bit, but a moderate activity level is anyone that's about 3 to 6 METs, meaning it's 3 to 6 times as hard as resting, which does equate to a walking rate of about 3 miles an hour. And walking is just a good example, but there's lots of things that you do that could be just as on the same intensity spectrum as walking and would take just as many METs to do, but they don't involve the same muscles because you can't walk very well because of, like me, you have a lot of arthritis in your joints. And so walking's not my strong point, but put me in a boat and I'm going to whale. Okay, so it's all kind of relative, but you can work super hard and work around your limitations when you can. Okay,
WAIL versus WHALE?
kind of both. So we'll talk more about this too, I think. So 600 to 1200 calories expended per week falls into this category of moderate activity. Okay, and if you thought about a typical workout where you're going for 30 minutes and you're covering maybe 3 miles, you're probably burning about 300 calories. So to get to 600 calories, you have to do probably a whole hour's worth of exercise, or a pretty vigorous amount of work for less time. But that's still what, if you thought about it, that's an hour, 3 times a week would be, around 2,000 calories burned if you pulled that off every week. Okay, so some other terms I just want to sort of define, because they're basically, these are training principles that you probably totally understand and you're doing all the time, and you don't think about them as being principles of exercise training, but they certainly are applicable. And a super important part about exercise training is this thing called progressive loading. This is common sense, to be honest. So exercise is something that you want to be doing. You have these goals to be doing 60 minutes or 30 minutes or whatever is the goal that you've accomplished, but that doesn't mean you get up on day one and start doing that, right? You build up to it. You start with a little bit, and each day you do a little bit more so that you develop the tolerance to accomplish your end range goal of 45 minutes or whatever it might be. So that's progressive. You want to take little steps to get to where your ultimate goal. And most of the people in our room are basically in this quote maintenance category, because they've spent a lot of time already in this loading motion. They've already built up. But then we had this break for 2 years, and you might kind of be back at a point where you do need to build back up. So pay attention to that. And sort of one encouragement is to think about increasing your hydration only like about 5 minutes a week. So if you're then comfortably walking 30 minutes a day and that's easy, but you really want to do 60, that doesn't mean all of a sudden start walking 60, do 30, next week do 35, 2 weeks later do 40, then 45, and build up to or 60. And then your joints are going to be so much happier with you, because you've adjusted them to the demands that you're expecting of them. So you do have some long-term goals, but you're encouraged to be logical and smart about how you progress and build back in a slow fashion. Okay. The long-term goal, like I said, is 30 to 60 minutes, but you build up to that. And I don't know if I'm sure you're familiar with this fable or story about the Minotaur, where the guy carried the baby bull on his shoulders and did that every day. And pretty soon he's carrying this giant bull because he got stronger as the bull got bigger. And so you're not encouraged to carry bulls around, but you are encouraged to use this progressive loading, where little by little you add to what you're doing, so that you build your strength slowly over time and you adapt to it. Paul. You bet. Okay. Okay, another important training principle is a thing called specificity. And this makes sense. You're going to adapt the best when you do the thing that you're trying to get better at. So the given muscles are going to get stronger if you do the exercises that are using that muscle. So if you want to get to where you can walk better, you need to walk more. If you want to play the piano better, you need to play the piano. You practice the piano. If you want to ride a bicycle better, you need to ride the bike. So that's very specific. The specificity means that you're going to adapt most specifically in the manner when you're applying loads in the way that you want to progress. There's also a thing called crossover. And that means that you're going to adapt to stuff and you're going to see benefits when you're doing things that are going to help other activities. So, bike riding is a cardiovascular exercise, but it's also very quadricep centric. I mean, you have to use your leg muscles a lot. So if you ride your bike, your leg muscles are going to get stronger. And if your leg muscles are stronger, then they're going to help you walk better because you rode the bike. And if you did other things to make your leg muscles stronger, like maybe some weight exercises for quads, you're going to probably bike better because your legs are now stronger. So that's what's called crossover, that most of the stuff that you're doing is going to be benefiting you in more than one way. Okay. Yes, if you want to get better at walking, you should walk, but there's other things that you can do that are going to help you walk better just because you got basically more fit and had a stronger back and a stronger leg muscles, etc. So that's crossover. And my real goal today was to talk about this thing that I call functionality. And so when you're functional, that means that you basically can function. You can do the things that you need to do. You can move around and you're comfortable and you're safe. Okay. So we have these things called tasks of daily living, which sometimes are a measurement of our function. So if you can do the stuff that you need to do, meaning, get out of bed, walk into the kitchen, climb out to the front door to pick up the newspaper, all these little stuff that you completely take for granted because that's just what you do. You function all the time. You get up and down, you move around. All these basic tasks, bathing ourselves, preparing meals, etc., using the bathroom. Those are super important functional skills that you really don't want to lose, right? You lose your independence when you can no longer do these basic functions, these tasks of daily living, okay? So it's my personal opinion, it's really important for you to maintain your function because obviously you want to be taking care of yourself the best you can, the longest you can. You don't want to have other people to be helping you around doing stuff because number one, there might not be anybody there to do that. And even so, it's embarrassing and a burden possibly to have other people, help you get out of bed. Anyway, so maintaining your function is just huge. And we're going to flip and talk about these different parts of fitness and sort of how they fit into helping you maintain your function. So there's 4 main things that come about from becoming more physically fit: cardiovascular, muscular, flexibility wise, and balance is the 4th one I like to include. And we'll talk about each of those. So balance is actually a huge one, and especially the older you get. And I'm going to share Gesna is dealing with a lot of vertigo each year. That's totally messing up her balance. That's super huge and cumbersome, and obviously needs addressing because that's her function is affected because there's stuff going on, in her eyeballs or somewhere that's keeping her from being able to stand up straight. So that messes you up. That affects your function. So you don't want to lose that because you want to be able to move basically. And so when you have good balance, when you can hold yourself up, that's a good thing. And the stuff that you can do to help your balance improve is basically going to help your function because this balance stuff basically helps you keep track of where your body is in space, etc. And so I do several things that basically are balance exercises. We participated in a program last semester with the PT students that was all about balance. So there's a lot of different things you can do for balance. And if it's ever a question for you, we can work up some individual stuff. But again, it's a personal thing and there's lots of things you could do, whether it's just exercises on your own at home, doing the routines that I do here at the session, doing Tai Chi with Dave is going to help your balance for sure. Those are individual choices, but all of those are activities basically that have a balance component to them, meaning you have to shift your weight around, you have to stand on one foot here and there, you have to hold some positions. That's going to help you posturally, and it's going to help your balance, and in the long run, that's going to help your function. So you're encouraged to do something for balance somewhere. Flexibility, again, the older I get, is something I value more and more. And the flexibility just means you can take your joints through the range of motion. And if you can move easily through a range of motion, then basically that's a muscle in a situation that's less likely to get hurt. You're going to hold yourself up better if you can go through this range of motion. If you start to fall down and you catch yourself, you're going to tolerate that better if you have the flexibility to let you maneuver into a position that's going to be safer for you to land, those kinds of things. So I think flexibility is important, and there's lots of ways to impart flexibility, but the bottom line is that there's some stretching involved, okay? And stretching can be either slow and steady, the static motion. It can be a dynamic kind of movement where you're moving a joint through a range of motion more quickly. Those are, again, personal choices, and there's a place for both of them. But again, this improved flexibility is going to help your function because you're going to have a better ability to move your body through space and to hold yourself up. So flexibility is encouraged. This is a good flexibility activity, looking for your remote. So So I want to spend a fair amount of time talking about strength training, muscular fitness, because that actually is really the place where you're maintaining your function, okay? So muscle fitness refers to individual muscles themselves and whether they have the ability to generate a lot of tension and are strong and also have some endurance, meaning that they can contract over and over again and keep going when you're asking your leg muscles to pump that bike around for 30 minutes to keep your leg muscles going. So it's that crossover thing that if you have strong muscles, you're going to do your cardiovascular activities better. And if you're doing stuff cardiovascularly, you're walking, you're biking, you're rowing, you're using muscles and you're helping them stay strong. And that's going to help you with all these mundane tasks of daily living that you need to function, basically. Refusing to go to the gym is not the same thing as resistance training. Okay, so some important things to know about strength training, especially in a population that might have some heart disease, is that there's stuff that goes on when you're exerting a lot of tension that can have a cardiac effect. And the thing that particularly happens that's, I don't know if it's worrisome, but that heart patients need to be mindful is that lifting weights probably is going to make your blood pressure go up. Okay. And the blood pressure is going to go up in response to how much you're straining and lifting. Okay. Which is why, for the most part, the weights that we do are all basically not very heavy and a lot of repetitions, because if you're doing an exercise strength lifting routine that is focusing on that, lots of reps, light resistance, the changes in your blood pressure are not going to be very profound. We're not trying to lift, twice our body weight or anything. Those are the amounts of weight. Those guys that are deadlifting, 300 pounds, their blood pressure is probably 300 or 400 systolic, which obviously is kind of scary. Mhm. Yeah, you rupture stuff. No kidding.
Yeah.
Right. So the encouragement is, yes, you should be lifting some weights, but you need to be doing them in a safe manner so you're not having profound increases in your blood pressure. And it's kind of relative to what you're lifting, and everybody lifting basically 50 to 60% of what they can lift is going to have about the same kind of response. But obviously a stronger person is going to be lifting more. But if it's still relative to what he can lift, it's okay. Sure.
I resist doing the
Uh-huh.
weight because of the spinal issues that I have. When I do it, it just exacerbates and makes it worse. When I'm done, it's like
So we need to find a way for you to do stuff that you're not hurting yourself.
I really want to do it, but
Yeah, we need to find a workaround for you. Yeah. So just some general things about lifting weights. Again, and this is when you're thinking about lifting free weights, a barbell or something, that there's physics involved. And so you're lifting more or less depending on where you are in the what do you call it? The lever arm of this, what you're lifting. And so it's really hard at first, and then it gets easier because it's a shorter distance you have to pull, etc. So be mindful of that. And it says pressure also increases profoundly if doing a Valsalva maneuver, bearing down while lifting. And again, that's a logical, physiological approach to how you're dealing with the stress of trying to lift something really heavy, is to kind of bear down and to, you do the same thing when you're having a bowel movement. You increase the pressure so you can push stuff out. And that's what you need to do. Sometimes you do need to have that pressure difference, but you don't want it to be so profound that your blood pressure is going really high. And one way that helps you when you're lifting weights is to be mindful of that, is to make sure you're breathing. Okay, so you can't do this Valsalva maneuver, bear down, closing your glottis and bearing down, and breathe at the same time. So as long as you know that you're breathing, you're going to be safer. Okay, so breathing is definitely encouraged. Correct. Okay. Okay, so the places where you want to be doing some strength training, again, as individual, it depends on your personal activity, your personal choices and the things that you're liking to do in life. And then also kind of where you're fitting into the whole spectrum. So for the most part, we as bipedal organisms, we walk around a lot. So typically our leg muscles are usually strong enough. We don't use our arms as much. And so sometimes we lack upper body strength because we quit lifting stuff with our arms. So upper body weightlifting is sort of encouraged to just improve that balance so that you have some strength in your upper body that you might have lost because you quit using your upper body. Strength in your legs is super, super important for this function thing, your quad strength. And also now I'm kind of aware of your calf strength. Those are the muscles that you need basically to get up. Okay, that's the thing you want to always be able to do, is to get up, right? Getting up is vital. So as long as you can get up, that means your leg muscles, your quad muscles and your calf muscles are probably strong enough to help you keep doing that. And obviously one of the best ways to keep the strength in those muscles is to get up a lot. Okay, practice getting up. And when we sit for long periods of time and we're not using those muscles, that's when we mess ourselves up. Okay, so basically maintaining strength in your quads and your calves is vital, especially for this main function and this ability to get up. So I can't underscore how that's an important thing to be doing. And I'm also super into core. That means your trunk, your abdomen, your hips, your back. That's the stuff that kind of holds you together, helps you have good posture, helps you stay erect. And your core is a critical part of your body that you need to have some integrity. And I've now, over the pandemic, I have a whole Tuesdays is my core day. And when I do my circuits, we do tons of core stuff. And that came about because an awareness that most of us don't do enough of that core stuff. We forego that. We don't bother. We don't bother to do any crunches. And you don't need to do as much as I do, an hour a day on a Tuesday, but it's not to your disadvantage to each time that you work out to spend a little bit of time doing a couple of things that are going to be basically focusing on your core. It's going to help your back. It's going to help your posture, etc. It's going to help your function. So core integrity is important. So when we work out your stuff, we're going to include that too, Gesnam. Okay, so how you do strength training, again, it's a personal thing. You could do it in the gym. You could do it in your own home with whatever you got. You can do it out in your backyard, in the park, in the park course or whatever. And there's lots of different approaches. Again, it has to do with muscles generating tension against resistance. And that resistance can be lots of things. It can be an actual weight. It could be a band that you're pulling against. It could be a machine weight. It could be just a body part. Okay. Push-ups and sit-ups are two excellent exercises that the only equipment required is your body. You're lifting your body against gravity, and that's helpful. Okay. Isometrics are when you contract muscles and don't really move. There's a place for that as well. So again, there's many ways you can do some stuff to help your muscles be stronger. It could be gym stuff. It could be just stuff you do at home. So whether it's an actual weight routine, a band routine, or just doing stuff because you work in the yard, you work on your car, you work in your shop, you build stuff, whatever. There's things that you could be doing that are going to help maintain the strength of your muscles. It could even mean, driving the cart up and down in Costco and lifted things in and out of your cart. You need strength to do that. And then there's other organized things like yoga and Tai Chi that are going to help maintain that strength as well. So the thing about strength training exercises is they're very specific to the muscles used. So you kind of have to think about what muscles do you care are stronger, and then you pick the exercises that are helping those. So the little routines that we have focus on some primary, like the CDC suggests, the major muscle groups. So we use, the chest, the arms, the shoulders, the torso, the back and the legs. Those are big muscle groups. And you pick, there's a lot of different exercises you can do that focus on each of those. And one is fine. You can do multiple and different ones if you want. Key thing is that you're generating against resistance. And as I've mentioned over and over again here, that these maintaining your strength in these muscles, those are the things that are going to significant the most to this concept of maintaining your function. So the handle on your recliner does not count as exercise machine. So the last thing to talk about in the exercise world is this thing about cardiovascular fitness, because obviously that's huge, because that's what we care about for the most part, is taking care of our hearts. And so obviously many of the activities that we're doing are focusing on that, keeping our cardiovascular fitness up. So if you're cardiovascularly fit, that just means your body has a nice efficient ability to pump blood to your working muscles, and it's an integration of all these systems working together. Your lungs pulling air in, your bloodstream picking the oxygen up out of it, and your heart pumping it around to your working muscles. It's everything all working together that makes you a fit, functional person. And toward that end, the things that you do that help that are, again, these activities that use lots of muscles, and they're sustained. You're doing it for an extended period of time. So 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes, you need to spend some time priming the pump and getting your metabolism up and keeping it up. That's going to help you improve this concept. And that's these activities where you're using these big muscle groups are the ones that are going to make you more cardiovascularly fit. And lots of examples of those. And it doesn't hurt to think about it sort of as your upper and your lower body. And we all have choices or situations that dictate which ones of these we're going to use. But if you're using your legs primarily, that's stuff like walking, biking, dancing would have a nice big cardiovascular leg component to it. There are things you can do where your arms are the primary muscle group, what's people like me sometimes prefer, because orthopedically their legs aren't going to let them do what they need to do. So rowing is a good example, swimming, any kind of arm movement. And then if you just thought about it, if the biggest bang for your buck had to do with using the most muscles that you could, obviously an activity where you're using both your upper and your lower body is going to have a more profound effect. So there are multiple things you can do where you're using both your lower and your upper body at the same time. And to be honest, rowing is one of them. Rowing has a very big leg component to it. The reason I like rowing is because it's really sort of an all body thing. It's your legs, it's your back, it's your arms. You got to use your whole body to row. And there's other things, the Schwinn Aerodyne is a popular machine because that's a machine that you can pump with your arms and or your legs. And cross-country skiing is another example of an activity that has both an arm and a leg component. And just so that the people that have the biggest ability to the highest levels of cardiovascular fitness are Norwegian cross-country skiers. And that kind of makes sense just because of what they're doing. So those are the people that can really pump out the O2 because they well, they've got that down, I guess. Anyway, so just think about that. Again, these are all personal choices, and it's not like you have to only pick one and that's the thing you're going to do every day for the rest of your life. It's totally okay to have different things that you like to do. And some days you bike, and some days you walk, and some days you row, and some days you swim. Whatever works for you is totally, totally okay. Doing something is more important than what you did. And the muscles that you use are sort of a function of which ones are working, I guess, that day. Anyway, you always see a lot of banter about what exercise does for you and how it keeps you healthy. And it does indeed do all these things, and all the benefits that are attributed to exercise really are because of improvements in your cardiovascular fitness. So it's the walking and the biking and the et cetera, and increasing your ability to do cardiovascular exercise that is going to have the biggest effect on making you healthier. That's going to control your blood pressure and control your diabetes and control your weight, et cetera. The other stuff, the strength training, does some of this, especially the bones and the mental health. But again, it's a collection of stuff. But the primary benefits health-wise come from improving your cardiovascular fitness. And I want to spend a little time talking about this MET stuff because I think it's helpful if you understand that. So that's a word we use a lot. You see it on the machines. You're doing 5 METs, you're doing 2 METs, you're doing 10 METs, whatever the machine might think you're doing is a function of how hard you're working, right? How fast it's going, how steep it is, etc. And every physical activity that we do sort of has this thing called a metabolic cost. And the harder it is to do, obviously, the greater that cost it's going to be. And MET is just it stands for metabolic equivalent. It's just a unit of energy expenditure that helps you kind of understand that. And your personal tolerance for any given activity obviously is a function of your own capacity, how many METs you could actually do compared to the workload that you're trying to accomplish, either on the treadmill or the bike or walking up a steep hill by your house, okay? So an activity that takes 3 METs to do, and walking at 3 miles an hour on level ground takes about 3 METs. That's for somebody that has heart failure and their functional capacity is only 3 or 4 METs. Obviously, for them to walk 3 miles an hour is pretty dang hard, right? That's 100% of their capacity. They may be able to do it for a short amount of time, but probably not very long, and it's going to wipe them out, right? So it's relative what you can do, but that same 3 MET activity for somebody that's more fit, they can do say 10 METs. It's only 30% of their capacity, so obviously they could probably do it for a long time. That's why it's just helpful to understand your own personal capacity and the level of stuff that you're trying to get done. And to kind of help you understand that, so 1 MET is considered the energy cost of rest. It's about 70 calories per hour. And you know, if you're doing something that takes 3 METs, it's 3 times as hard as that, or about 210 calories an hour. If it's 6 METs, it's 6 times as hard as that. So it's just all relative to rest, these MET numbers. And it's still really basically just a unit of energy consumption. Okay, so MET is really the same as calories per hour or calories per minute. The harder you work, the more calories you're gonna burn doing it. The more MET. So 1 MET, you're using about 1 calorie a minute, 70 in an hour. If you're doing something that's 3 METs, you're going to burn about 3 calories a minute. If you're doing 6 METs, that's up to 7 calories a minute. And so if you're walking at 5 METs for 30 minutes, you're going to burn about 300 calories, right? Those are just ways to understand this stuff, these units, okay? And another sort of kind of explanation, and it's relatively true, that the relationship between walking speed and MET levels is pretty linear as long as you're walking. So if you're walking at 3 miles an hour, that's about 3 METs. If you're walking at 2 miles an hour, that's about 2 METs. 1 mile an hour is only 1 MET. So that means if you're walking at 1 mile an hour, energy-wise, you're really kind of expending the same amount of energy as sitting, but you know it's not, if that's what all you can do because of orthopedic issues, et cetera, or balance issues, you probably are using more than 1 MET to do that because you haven't built up the tolerance for it, but it's going to come quickly if you can keep doing it. But the difference between walking and running is pretty profound. And as soon as you go from 1 foot always being on the ground to what we call a jog, where you're basically jumping up and down across the ground, then the METs go up profoundly. And it's also very individualized. And so, because if you've ever watched people run, some people are very graceful and look good, and some people, you wonder why they're still doing it, because obviously it looks painful. So everybody has different tolerances for this ability to run. And when you're, again, bounding and jumping up and down, it takes a lot more METs to do. So 5 miles an hour, which is pretty hard to walk that fast, takes about 8 METs. So that's you know, a lot more than you couldn't, if you're running at 8 miles an hour, you're probably in the 10 or 12 MET. Right? That's pretty dang fast, right? Anyway, that's just so you kind of understand the connection there. This is just a little schematic that to give you the notion that exercise is kind of a dose response, that the benefit is proportional to the effort put through, and the more you're going to do, the greater they're going to be the benefit. So which is what this line here is, so that the more you do, the more more active you are, the better is the health benefit with respect to how your your life. But obviously there's sort of a risk ratio that kind of enters in. So the harder you work, the closer you are to basically to the point where you might be hurting yourself, because you're doing stuff so hard that you're tearing muscles down, etc. So this is the level of risk. So the level of risk is pretty low as long as you're doing stuff easily, and the risk gets harder when you're training really hard. So, we're not encouraged necessarily to train at this level, because the risk is pretty high and the amount of benefit is not so much greater than what you're going to get out of it. So we're kind of encouraged to be down in here, where you want to get the maximum benefit health-wise and the lowest amount of risk for hurting yourself. So, but again, that's an individual choice. And there, people, I'm sure, that are the ones that are super aggressive and super vigorous and want to run marathons and want to climb steep mountains and etc. And so, they're putting themselves at risk, and that's their choice. But we may or may not have the same level. So this is an old slide. Let me know if you remember this, John, but this is something I worked out a long time ago that sort of just hopefully cements this concept. So, I didn't know there was sound. If you think about your function, okay, that kind of needs to be your base. And the stuff you need to do for your function, those tasks of daily living, those typically are not metabolically demanding, right? To get up, to move around, those are activities that typically take on the order of 2 or 3, maybe 4 METs, okay? So most of us can do that. Most of us have a capacity for at least 2 or 3 METs. So our basic functioning is okay. We have an okay base. And if you've ever obviously been in a situation where that's compromised because of an event, a stroke, a surgery, etc., you're messed up. You can't do your basic functioning. You're compromised. And so that is a primary goal, basically, is to regain your function. And that's where PT is, home health visits from the physical therapist are huge to help you basically get your function back, so you can take care of yourself and do the stuff that you need to do to get around. So you want this nice base of function to be able to do that. And then the encouragement, obviously, is that you're doing some cardiovascular stuff on top of that. We talked about this, that you're doing, 30 minutes most days of the week to build up your cardiovascular endurance. And so again, that's an individual thing, a choice thing, how much you want to put into it. But going back to that dose thing, the more you do, basically, probably the more fit you're going to become, and the higher you're going to kind of get in this tree level. But those are choices. And so you're encouraged to have a base, but to build upon it and to get your cardiovascular level up to the best point that works for you. And if you make decisions beyond that you do want to run a marathon or climb that mountain, then you basically have some performance goals that the rest of us don't necessarily need or have for health reasons, but those are personal choices. And that takes a lot of METs to do that. Okay. So again, it's just, you need to be aware of that. If you really do want to climb a steep mountain, you got to train for it. You got to work up to it. You got to put some time and energy into getting your MET level up so that you can tolerate that. And I always feel really good when people come back and they say things like, I went on this trip, Karen did this recently, and I was climbing up and down stairs and it was easy. That's wonderful to hear. That means that she did an okay job of keeping her fitness level up so that she could do the stuff that she wanted to do, and it was well tolerated. That's should be a goal. Anyway, so that's my tree analogy. And since I made a tree, I had to decorate it. Okay, I have one more little animation here, and that's sort of where this is going. So your goal is to be physically active. And when you're physically active, you're doing stuff so that you can be stronger and your heart can be stronger. And if all that's together, basically your tolerance for exercise is better. And one good reason to have your tolerance higher is so that the stuff you're doing throughout the day is better tolerated. So you're submaximally more efficient. You do all that, basically, you're going to be a more fit person. And when you're a more fit person, that's where you get the health benefits, that you're going to control your weight, you're going to control your lipids, your sugars, your disease resistance. And that's what makes you more healthy, because you were more fit, you got more healthy. And the presumption is if you're healthier, then basically you're going to live longer. And at least if you don't live longer, you're going to have a better quality of life the time that you're still here on the planet. So those are kind of the goals, and why activity is kind of important. This again is an old picture, but one I think that's kind of telling. If you thought back to when we first started, that you typically, if you do nothing, you're going to decline, lose basically 10% of your 5% of your function every decade, right? So that's what this line here is. If you're 30 and you decline, if you don't do anything, you sit on the couch for the next 60 years, if you make it that far, this is how much you can expect to, you started at 10 mets, and after losing 10% of your function every decade, by the time you're 90, you're down here in the 4 met range, okay? That's sort of the expected rate of decline that we take for granted. Oh, that's going to happen to me. When I'm 90, I'm only going to be doing half of what I did when I was 30, okay? But if you thought about, you certainly know people that are active throughout their whole lives, so they're not going to decline at the same rate. So if they're fitter when they're younger, they keep being active, they're not going to decline that point, and they still could be 90 and still be a pretty fit person here. And we can't worry about those individuals. All we can worry about is kind of where we are personally are in the curve. And it certainly is to your advantage, no matter what your age is to basically kind of bump yourself up on the curve, and then make sure that you keep active so that you don't decline as much as you might otherwise if you just sat under your tush for the next 10 years. So that's the goal, is to bump yourself up on this curve and not decline as much, so you can maintain as much of your function as long as you can and still get out of your chair when you're 100. Okay. So some goals, we're not really going to talk about this, but you just, obviously everyone's circumstance is different. And we all have our own personal goals, and some of them are health related, and some of them are just individual because of stuff we like or don't like. And you have to take that all into account when you're figuring out a program. It doesn't get you anywhere if you know you need to do something, but you hate to do it. You're never going to make yourself do it. I do have a story here. I've mentioned this before. A long time ago, there was a man that was in the cardiac rehab program that did a really good job. He was actually a UCD human resources guy, and he did well in the rehab program. He's somebody, typical heart rehab person that had had a bypass or something, did well. And then he moved to Oregon, and I saw him about 3 years later because he came down to a visit, and his name was Richard. So what are you doing, Richard, these days? Oh, I have a treadmill at home, and I do just what I did when I was in cardiac rehab. I do 25 minutes on the treadmill, and I have a bike and I ride that for 20 minutes. And I do that, 4 days a week. And I have very rarely missed a time in the 3 years that I've been gone. And I said to him, oh, you must really like it. And his response was, no, I hate it, but I know I have to do it. So he approached it kind of in a not bad manner, that he just accepted. It was just like the drugs he took. This was the dose he needed to administer himself, was his 45 minutes of cardiovascular exercise. He had settled on 4 days a week, and that worked for him. And he was, still here and doing well. And maybe he's still doing it. I don't know. That was a long time ago. But again, it's always individualized. And there's a dream out there that there's something that you like, so that you're going to want to keep doing it, because you really aren't encouraged to keep doing stuff that you hate, because it's harder. And again, thinking back to the rehab experiences, look at that star there. There's individual things that matter. And so if you're a person that has high blood pressure, obviously you still need to do all this, but you need to make sure you keep track of that, and you take your blood pressure medicine so that your blood pressure is not an issue for you. And if you have diabetes, you need to make sure that you're keeping track of what your sugars are doing when you're doing all this, because it has a bearing in there. And this is something we don't spend a lot of time in this room, but sometimes people have heart rhythm issues, and you know, if you know you're one of them, pay attention to that and know what's going on when you're exercising that possibly could be affecting that. And again, this is all on your onus to take care of these details because they're your personal situation, and we'll kind of help you monitor them the best we can, but it's still up to you to know what your situations are. And just some take-home points. So who needs to do all this? Anybody getting older, that's all of us. And if you're facing chronic disease issues, it's especially important. And if you have weight management goals, it's especially important. And if you want to get out of your chair when you're 105, exactly. We all want to do that. So we got to keep those quad strength up. And so this is one of my favorite pictures. You want to maintain your quad strength, okay? And whether that's because you spent a lot of time doing squats or sit to stand or whatever, you got to keep your leg strength up because we all want to be able to get off the toilet, I'm pretty sure. Okay, if it doesn't challenge you, it doesn't change you. And then I threw this in here from the blue zones because again, Dr. Lopez mentioned that last week. And again, it just fits back to those are the people that are doing stuff all the time. They probably don't go to the gym and spend 30 minutes walking on the treadmill, but they are active and they move a lot, okay? And they get to be 100. Some other encouragements. This is a really old picture. You can tell for lots of reasons. One is the paper sacks, right? The car, the lack of gray hair. Any rate, so this is one of my common encouragements is basically carry your own groceries, because that's a place where that's me. Yeah, this is really old. But basically that's one of my encouragements, carry your own groceries, because that's an activity that has a strength component to it that's huge for lots of reasons. You know, you got to contract these muscles, you got to hold them up, you have to sustain it. So in my personal, I don't know if you have a lot of bags on the car there, I had 3 kids, so my goal was always to get into the house with as few trips as possible, which is why I would carry lots of sacks. So that's a personal choice. But again, there's a strength requiring component. And the more you keep carrying your own stuff, the better off you're going to be. And we commonly let other people help us. And that's not a bad thing, but it is limiting our opportunities to have some strength benefit gained from carrying your own groceries. And my other encouragement is, this is my son who is now almost 40 years old, but kids, and this fits back to the finding stuff that you like to do. You know, kids by human nature, if they're, at least they used to be, you know, they move, they just do it by nature. They don't walk in a straight line. They have to run up and down the hills to get, you know, across the park. So by nature, they like to move and they have fun doing it. And you're probably going to be better off in the activities that you find to do if you can find the kid in yourself and do the things that for you are sort of fun, because that's really a goal, is to enjoy what you're doing. Okay, so that's all I had for slides. So Paul, you had a question or not?
Maybe work up to this, like it makes stretching kind of prep for, you know, I mean, I can't start.
Well, yes and no. So that goes back to the progress. So he asked, can you just start doing stuff and it's going to be okay? Or you do need to build up to stuff. So I have a routine that's a 45-minute stretching routine. And so the first time you do it, yeah, you might not last the whole time. That's okay. You do what you can and you try the ones that you can. For the stretching, for the most part, is well tolerated because you just reach to the extent that you can, and over time you get to where you can reach further because you got more flexible. But it shouldn't wear you out so that you can't actually sit there for the 30 seconds that we're trying to touch our toes. You're just not going to touch them necessarily.
Basically, just to prevent injury, you know, so
Right.
so you're kind of warming up.
Yes.
I guess that's it. Warming up.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah, no, that was very interesting. Thank you. I'm sorry I missed the first half,
Oh.
but I had to do that.
So help me stop this. You did?
You did. Oh, no, you said recording.